In August 2015, crowds gathered outside London's Natural History Museum for the Cinderella Ball. It was a night of high-tier fundraising, designed to provide magical experiences for children living through terminal illnesses. The event was the crowning achievement of the Believe in Magic charity, founded by 16-year-old Megan Barry and her mother, Jean. By this point, the pair were fixtures in the British media, lauded by politicians and world-famous musicians alike. The charity's success was driven by a powerful narrative. Megan was herself a patient, reportedly battling a terminal brain tumor. This story secured the unwavering support of One Direction, who wore the charity's wristbands and hosted events to champion Megan's cause. That celebrity momentum translated into institutional validation. Believe in Magic raised hundreds of thousands of pounds and received public praise from Prime Minister David Cameron, who called Megan an inspiration to the entire country. That this massive charitable empire was built entirely on a medical history provided by the Barrys themselves. In the rush to support a tragic cause, no one in the public or the media had requested independent verification of Megan's diagnosis. Joanna Ashcraft, the mother of a child who was actually undergoing treatment for neuroblastoma, began following Jean's online updates. Having navigated the rigid reality of oncology wards, she found the details of Megan's care increasingly difficult to reconcile. Jean's fundraising appeals, like this request for $180,000 for proton beam therapy, were becoming more extreme. She claimed Megan was taking over 100 pills a day and described a tumor with tentacles that had wrapped themselves around the primary blood supply to Megan's brain. Despite these highly specific, terrifying descriptions of the tumor's growth, Jean never named a hospital, a lead consultant, or a specific ward. For Joanna, the lack of clinical documentation stood in stark contrast to the vividness of the pleas for money. When Joanna raised these concerns in parent groups, she was met with fierce resistance. Other supporters argued that they had seen Megan's illness with their own eyes, citing the large amount of medication she carried as proof of her condition. These conflicting accounts, the visible medication versus the invisible clinical data, convinced Joanna and a small circle of parents that the only way to find the truth was to track the Barrys themselves. The investigators started with a digital trap. They sent an email to Jean containing a hidden tracking pixel, a tiny invisible image file. When Jean opened the message, the pixel automatically logged her location and transmitted it back to the group. The IP address didn't lead to a specialized cancer center. It traced back to Disney's Animal Kingdom Lodge in Florida. While Megan's supporters believed she was in a life-threatening crisis, she and her mother were staying at a luxury resort. When Joanna called the hotel directly and reached the room, Jean claimed they were indeed there, but insisted the hotel room had been specially converted into a private hospital suite to accommodate Megan's deteriorating state. To bypass the pressure issues of flying with a brain tumor, Jean claimed they traveled by sea. The investigators tracked the return voyage of the Queen Mary II and hired a private investigator to wait at the port of Southampton for the pair to disembark. The investigators' report shattered the medical narrative. Megan and Jean were observed walking off the ship, laughing and pushing heavy suitcases themselves. There were no wheelchairs, no oxygen tanks, and no signs of the physical frailty Jean had described days earlier. This combination of digital tracking and physical surveillance provided the first objective proof that the terminal brain tumor was a multi-million-dollar fabrication. The footage of Megan walking freely proved they were lying about the cancer, but it raised an even darker question about Jean's motives. The behavior aligned with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition known in the UK as fabricated or induced illness, or FII. It is a form of abuse where a caregiver fakes or causes symptoms in a child to gain attention, sympathy, or financial reward. Megan's older half-siblings later described a pattern of similar behavior in their own childhoods. They recalled Jean playing a game where she would balance heavy cans on the edge of high cupboards, waiting for one to fall on a child so she could act as the heroic caregiver during the resulting injury. They also noted that Megan's illnesses often mirrored those of others around her. If a sibling or a relative required medical attention for a specific ailment, Megan would frequently develop identical symptoms shortly thereafter. For Jean, the charity provided an international stage for this behavior. It allowed her to monetize Megan's supposed suffering while gaining the validation of some of the most famous people in the world. In 2017, the Charity Commission began investigating Believe in Magic. But in March 2018, before the investigation reached its conclusion, Megan Barry died at the age of 23. Following her death, a coroner's autopsy examined her brain. The report was definitive. Megan's brain was morphologically normal. There was no tumor, no swelling, and no evidence she had ever suffered from the condition that defined her life. Megan died of acute heart failure caused by liver disease. It was the direct result of the massive amounts of unnecessary medication, including heavy opioids, she had been taking to maintain the appearance of her mother's fabricated illness. By forcing Megan to live out the symptoms of a terminal diagnosis for a decade, the upkeep of the lie eventually triggered a real one. After Megan's death, Believe in Magic was shuttered. Investigators found over £100,000 of donor money unaccounted for, and Jean Barry eventually left the country for France. Zahn continued to deny any wrongdoing, eventually sending a blurry, unverified brain scan to a journalist as proof of the tumor the coroner had already proven did not exist. Megan's story illustrates the lethal reach of fabricated or induced illness. It shows how easily public sympathy can be weaponized, and that sometimes digital forensics are the only tool capable of dismantling a manipulative medical ruse.